Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we're here to share the extreme urgency of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which entered into force with 50 ratifications on January 22nd, 2021. And Tara, if you can advance the slide. There we go. Thank you. While none of the nuclear powers have ratified the treaty, yet it has had important consequences, including what is known as the nuclear taboo. The efforts of many people, next slide, the efforts of many people went into the achievements of the treaty so far. With this presentation, we honor the intrepid and monumental efforts of Nihon Hidankyo, a collective of Japanese hibakusha, atomic bomb survivors, who received the Nobel Peace Prize in December 2024. The photos and art shared here are from the A-Bomb and Humanity, a set of panels produced for exhibition by members of Nihon Hidankyo and brought to us by Syracuse University professor Diane Grimes. Next. The horror of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki cannot be overstated. Of those who survived, many emerged as orphans and faced terrible hardship. It is those who were very young at the time who are still here to organize all these years later. Over 300,000 were killed by the bombing and radiation sickness. It took 11 years before the hibakusha gained freedom to assemble openly. In 1956, they were finally able to speak out. That's when they founded Nihon Hidankyo, a grassroots movement that became the largest and most widely representative hibakusha organization in Japan. They organized to build power with the goal of nuclear abolition. In introducing Nihon Hidankyo, Nobel Committee Representative Jürgen Watne-Friedness pointed out the civilization-ending potential and increasing danger. Nuclear powers are modernizing and upgrading our arsenals. Threats to use nuclear weapons in ongoing warfare are being made openly and repeatedly. And of course, note that modernization is a euphemism for building new weapons. Terumi Tanaka gave the Nobel acceptance speech for Nihon Hidankyo. He outlined their achievements, which you can watch out online, but referring to the wars and nuclear threats, he stated, "In addition to the civilian casualties, I am infinitely saddened and angered that the nuclear taboo threatens to be broken." Tanaka exhorts us that nuclear weapons and human life cannot coexist. He urges us all to become a force for change in the nuclear policies of our governments. It is with this determination of the hibakusha as our example that we will work for the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane, for opening us up with those great words. And welcome again, everyone who maybe has just joined us. My name is Emily Rubino. I'm Executive Director at Peace Action New York State, and I'm excited to be tonight's MC. Along with Diane, we have an incredible panel of speakers, including David Courtwright. Sorry, I'm trying to pin people and talk to them at the same time. Larry Whitner, and Rishi Gurudevan. First, I'd like to introduce David Courtwright, who's going to be talking about the nuclear weapon dangers of today. David Courtwright is the former executive director of SANE, which is Peace Action's predecessor, and was actively involved in the nuclear freeze movement of the 1980s, has written and edited more than 20 books, and is currently a visiting scholar at Cornell University. So David, please start us off.
Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you, New York State Peace Action, for inviting me to participate. It feels like I'm coming home to the organization that I was with for many years, SANE and Peace Action now. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you. And thank you to all of you who are participating online. By your presence, you're showing an interest and an understanding of the threat we face and the need to take action. We gather at an ominous moment. A new arms race is underway and international tensions are rising. The US is upgrading its nuclear arsenal, producing new bombs and missiles, and rebuilding weapons delivery systems. East-West tensions are rising, and negotiated arms control agreements have largely collapsed. Russia has threatened repeatedly to use nuclear weapons in its war with Ukraine and has issued a new strategic doctrine that significantly lowers the threshold for using these weapons. China is becoming more bellicose and has enlarged its nuclear capabilities, although its projected arsenal of about 500 bombs is well below the levels of the US and Russian arsenals. North Korea now has about 40 or 50 nuclear weapons and has enhanced its ballistic missile capacity. India and Pakistan are continuing their nuclear buildup in South Asia, and Israel retains 90 deliverable nuclear bombs. These realities prompted UN Secretary General Guterres to warn recently that the risk of nuclear warfare is at its highest level in decades. And those of us who care about peace and human survival need to pay attention and to take action. At the heart of the US nuclear program is what the Pentagon euphemistically calls, Diane's right, it's a euphemism, so-called nuclear modernization. The spending of an estimated $1.7 trillion over a 30-year period to completely rebuild and upgrade the entire US nuclear weapons complex. The program includes the new Sentinel land-based missile program, new ballistic missile submarines and their missiles, new aircraft and air-launched cruise missiles, a new nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile, and enormous new facilities to manufacture new nuclear bombs and plutonium components. The current nuclear upgrade is not merely a refurbishing of aging weapons, as the modernization narrative implies. It is a vast program for the reconstruction and enhancement of every element of the US nuclear arsenal. A wasteful diversion of taxpayer funds to create unnecessary weapons that will likely spark further arms buildups in Russia and China and increase the risk of nuclear war. The Sentinel is intended to replace the Cold War era Minuteman missiles, which previously carried 3 warheads. Under the 2011 New START agreement, that number was reduced to 1 warhead per missile. The Sentinel, however, is designed with the option of carrying 3 warheads if the New START treaty is not extended beyond its expiration date next year. Major aircraft programs are also in the works. The new B-21 strategic bomber will have the capacity to use both conventional and nuclear weapons. The Air Force is planning to build as many as 200 of these weapons at a cost per plane of $700 million, which is sure to rise. The construction of all these new ballistic missiles and aircraft systems will require additional nuclear warheads, new weapons, hundreds of them. And after a hiatus of nearly 30 years, after the end of the Cold War, when no nuclear warheads were produced, the US is now back in the business of building nuclear bombs, big time. Major construction is underway at the Savannah River site in South Carolina and the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. And the goal is to create the capacity for producing 80 plutonium pits and bombs every year. Both programs are massive in scale and are several years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget. And all of these new nuclear bombs need to be tested. Republican members of Congress and former aides to Trump are pushing for a resumption of nuclear testing. The stated purpose: to increase preparedness for the use of these newly designed warheads. The renewal of testing would likely prompt Russia to resume testing and would accelerate the emerging nuclear arms race. It would also undo one of the signature achievements of the freeze movement. Years of grassroots pressure, civil disobedience, and lobbying in Congress from the mid-'80s to the early '90s convinced Congress to cut off funds for any further nuclear testing. It was a great success for our movement, although now it's in jeopardy. So it's a grim picture we see. The obstacles to peace advocacy seem insurmountable. Yet progress toward denuclearization is possible and has occurred in the past at similar moments of peril. 40 years ago, during a comparable period of rising arms spending and East-West tensions, at much higher levels of nuclear overkill, with a right-wing presidency that spoke of prevailing in a nuclear war, we mobilized a mass movement and history turned. Who could have imagined that the Berlin Wall would fall without a shot being fired, or that nuclear arsenals would be slashed by more than 80%? Transformational change is possible and often begins at the initiative of civil society. Gorbachev and Reagan signed the treaties that ended the Cold War, but the freeze movement and the disarmament campaigns of Europe and all over the world prepared the way. Massive citizen pressure changed the climate of opinion and made support for arms reduction politically possible and then politically popular. The resulting policy change went beyond a freeze to a dramatic reversal of the arms race. As Pam Solo wrote, the freeze movement was a dazzling success at raising public awareness and setting the terms of debate. That victory ended the Cold War and led to a global sigh of relief. Fear of nuclear holocausts receded from our consciousness. We stopped worrying about the bomb. Now we are in a very different era, facing new, more complicated and dangerous nuclear threats. In responding to the present peril, we can and must draw inspiration and lessons from the experiences of the past. We know that movements can succeed if they articulate clear, focused, and achievable demands and deliver messages that are understandable and likely to attract public support. Effective framing and digital communications are essential. The power of movements depends on the ability to mobilize mass participation at the grassroots level and nationally. It also derives from the creation of broad and diverse coalitions and the ability to engage with political institutions. The combination of these factors and wise strategies can create change. The most important thing is the need to take action in the streets, well, when it gets a little bit warmer, and at our schools and religious institutions. And I'll close by saying that we need to confront our elected representatives with a clear message. We don't want more nuclear weapons, no use, no more, no testing. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, David, for opening us up with that. That's wonderful. And if you have questions for David, please save them for the Q&A portion. Next, I would like to reintroduce Diane Swords, our birthday girl, along with the birthday of the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Diane's going to be talking a little bit about the Back from the Brink campaign. For those who don't know her, she's a longtime anti-nuclear activist organizing public education, legislative, and divestment campaigns nationally with the Back from the Brink campaign, as well as with Peace Action New York State and the Syracuse Peace Council. So please, Diane.
Thank you. I guess there's no better way to share my birthday than with the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Seems totally appropriate. So I just want to thank everybody who's here to resist nuclear annihilation. Certainly my fellow panel members, the Peace Action support team, and all of you attending for being willing to look at this alarming issue. And thank you, David, for telling it like it is. I continue to work for nuclear abolition because, as David tells us, and you may hear from Larry, and certainly would hear from his books, the peace movement has been effective in these endeavors. We recognize, though, the terrible odds that we face now, but in specific terms of Back from the Brink, whether or not we can pass legislation this year, we can build the movement and we can work on legislation to put it in place for the future. Professor, historian, and author Vincent Ntundi says, and I see he's on this Zoom, great to see you. I find hope in the work of long-established groups, and that would certainly include Peace Action and its background with SANE and the Freeze. And I find hope in younger anti-nuclear activists and the movement around the world to formally ban the bomb. And so I'm so glad to have Rishi here with Students for Nuclear Disarmament, and you'll hear from him very soon. So Back from the Brink is a coalition working for the abolition, for nuclear abolition, promoting 5 achievable demands that would greatly reduce the risk of nuclear war. Back from the Brink was started in 2017 by members of Physicians for Social Responsibility and the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's not a coincidence that that's the same year that the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons passed in the United Nations 4 years ago today. A talk soon after one of the Back from the Brink founders at Cornell ignited a resurgence of anti-nuclear activism. And you folks on this webinar could also inspire your neighbors to believe in and work for a nuclear-free world. The policy solutions of Back from the Brink include steps the U.S. can take to immediately reduce the threat of intentional or accidental nuclear war while pursuing a verifiable time-bound agreement among nuclear-armed states to eliminate all nuclear arsenals, which is the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And as we know, the U.S., like Britain, China, France, and Russia, is already obligated under Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to take concrete steps towards eliminating their nuclear arsenals. And as we know, they have not done so. So the 5 legislative issues were combined in the last congressional session as House Resolution 77. This resolution is now being updated for the new session. Representative McGovern of Massachusetts promises to introduce it very soon. The issues included here are to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, to back the no first use stance in our policy, to end the sole authority of a president to launch a nuclear strike. And I feel chills as I even say that. To end the sole authority of end the sole authority to take weapons off hair trigger alert and to stop the expenditures for new weapons. And you can read about all of this on the Back from the Brink website at preventnuclearwar.org. We have no illusions that it will be easy, but we recently have local successes here in Syracuse, and these are similar to others around the country. And again, you can see endorsers in your area if you look on the website, preventnuclearwar.org. In Syracuse, we have 20 organizational endorsers, including community groups and congregations. And we're working for more. The mayor of Syracuse and Common Council have both endorsed, and some county and state legislators also. A state senator who had endorsed is now our new congressman. So we've already begun approaching him with the hope that he will continue to support us. So there are many ways that we encourage all of you to support these efforts. First of all, you can seek endorsements in your area, meet with organizations, religious groups, legislators, updating and showing our PowerPoint presentation about the campaign or creating your own. If you're interested in adapting ours to use for your area, you can contact us through info@peacecouncil.net and put nuclear in the subject line. And secondly, work on legislative efforts. After endorsements, we urge legislators at all levels to participate in supporting our legislation. So as I mentioned, last session of Congress, there was House Resolution 77, and we'll soon know what the name of the upcoming piece of legislation will be. While there has been pushback that nuclear weapons are not a local issue, Syracuse Mayor Walsh stated that endorsing Back from the Brink was a no-brainer. And he spoke of the importance to local communities. So I urge you to check and see if your local legislators have endorsed. Here are some other ways to increase our power. We can promote city resolutions. There are a number of these around the country already passed and a number being worked on now. Join, lead, or create a hub. There are many around the country. These are regional networks with the support of Back from the Brink. And I see a number of members of our upstate New York hub here. And we'll be working to get our senators to introduce a Back from the Brink resolution. And we provide support for one another's actions around the upstate area. Another thing that we encourage people on this call to do is to encourage your members of Congress to join the Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group. We are also preparing for the possibility that there will be efforts to resume nuclear testing. There's already preemptive work happening in Nevada. Share your own efforts and stay tuned. We encourage groups to send representatives to the meeting of states parties at the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons at the UN, March 3rd through 9th. And I see my other colleague from Syracuse Peace Council, who is planning to go with me, who is on this call. And you can see preventnuclearwar.org for more information on that. We also encourage many ways of working with allied groups. One suggestion is to write sign-on letters with relevant groups, environmental, anti-poverty, racial justice, etc., noting how our issues are related. And finally, I just want to encourage you, music and art and other creativity really help to get people involved, especially in issues that are so difficult to think about. One of our leaders was excited about the idea of a flash mob. And as a friend reminds me, politics is downstream of culture. So thank you so much for listening, and let's work together on this.
Next, I would like to introduce Larry Whitner, who's going to be talking a little bit more about the TPNW, or Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons itself. Larry Whitner is a professor of history emeritus at SUNY Albany, a former president of the Peace History Society, a current board member of the Peace Action Fund of New York State, and the author of Confronting the Bomb and many other works on nuclear disarmament issues, as Diane referenced earlier. So with that, Larry, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. Will the world ever be free of the menace of nuclear annihilation? As David mentioned, there was a promising start along these lines during the late 20th century, when pressed by a powerful movement against nuclear weapons, the nations of the world adopted a succession of nuclear arms control and disarmament agreements. But the tide gradually turned during the final years of the 20th century and the first decades of the 21st. As international conflict heightened and the nuclear disarmament movement waned, the nuclear arms race resumed. Deeply disturbed by the slide toward disaster, the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, comprised of hundreds of organizations, teamed up with the governments of many of the world's non-nuclear nations to foster a series of UN conferences focused on the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear war. Eventually, a UN conference with representatives from some 130 governments and dozens of civil society organizations met in March 2017 and began negotiations for a treaty outlawing nuclear weapons. In July of that year, the delegates adopted a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, TPNW, by a vote of 122 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstaining.